Good afternoon. I'm Graham Vulton. I'm an Honorary Research Fellow of the School of Biological Sciences at the University of Queensland. Today I want to tell you a complex story about context and nest predation, which at least one referee has described as schizophrenic, though I'm sure he actually meant psychotic. Whatever the correct adjective is that describes my talk today, I will warn you now, up front, that I draw a long bow in making my hypothesis on the predation of bird nests at my field site. But not about the context, that's a short bow. My intention is to provoke discussion, to provoke thought. My hypothesis is essentially derived from the context at my field site, and indeed, it is a context that has been largely lost from natural systems since the European invasion. The context I will focus on today is drawn from my field work and publications on the nesting ecology of woodland birds at Dryandra in southwestern Australia. Firstly, I'll show you where you'd find my field site. Then I'll paint a picture of that context because it is a striking context. Secondly, I'll introduce the most relevant components of this context and draw on them to back up my hypothesis, which I'll not tell you until near the end of the talk. Finally, I'll rush you through a conclusion. Okay, let's begin. This is the region where my story is set. It is the wheat belt of Western Australia. This picture was taken from a plane en route to Perth, a domestic airline. What you can see is a vast extent of agricultural land, a patchwork of farms and fields. A small river is running through it, highlighting the serious salt scald and the rising water table. The Western Australian wheat belt has been cleared of over 90% of its woodlands and 97% of its best woodlands. It's a vast area of 14 million hectares, which is an area over twice the size of Tasmania. Those darker patches you can see are not fragments of surviving woodland, but simply a different crop. My field site at Dryandra sits within this region. This is my field site. It's a close-up. Well, a small part of my field site. My field site is 27,000 hectares of old-growth, largely undisturbed woodland. Notice the groundwood, which has been cleared up by the farmers because it looked untidy. Which hasn't been cleared up in this case because it looked untidy. Notice the understory of native grasses. Dryandra has survived what has happened to the surrounding wheat belt because it had a commercially valuable native tree, brown mallet, which was essential in the tanning of leather about 40 to 50 years ago. Then, through the foresight of a small handful of people, 1080 poison was deployed from the early 1980s, while the 1080 poisoning program was aimed at protecting numbats through terminating foxes. It resulted in the survival of many different threatened animals, including, but not limited to, the birds. Dryandra holds an intact assemblage of birds in ecologically functional numbers. Between 1953 and 2008, most birds increased in abundance at Dryandra. Birds critically endangered in the wheat belt are commonplace at Dryandra. I have emphasized the words intact and ecologically functional numbers because they are critically important components of the context at Dryandra. And context. Dryandra's context is not simply an intact assemblage of birds. It is a surviving array of heterogeneous old-growth woodlands. It's ecologically functional numbers of threatened species and a vast array of species richness. It's a full community, including ecologically functional numbers of rare marsupials. and rare birds. But there are also the fungi, the slime molds, the invertebrates, and a full suite of nest predators. In 3 seasons of research, I found evidence of 21 different predators, or nest predators. But I'm sure there are more. Nest predators come from 4 classes of native, well, they came from 4 classes of native animals: marsupials, reptiles, birds, and invertebrates. Overall, my context at Dryandra is that of a pre-European Australia. This perspective may not be a perfect fit, but it gives you the right idea of Dryandra's context. Now, keep in mind that I am reporting data derived from this context. There are no fox, cats, goats, or stoats at Dryandra. I have native birds and native bird nest predators, and I have the most productive soils in the more mesic and low-lying areas of the landscape. The soils that the farmers took first and most enthusiastically. They took them because they were the most productive soils. So I have an intact community, even with the soils. Okay, let me show you some data. This slide shows you where the birds nest. These are the birds that are extirpated or have already seriously declined from woodlands across Australia. The white dots are locations of the nests. Birds clumped their nests in eucalyptus wandoo woodland on the most productive soils. In the previous picture, you can see I have drawn a thick, in the previous picture, in the picture you should be seeing now, I've drawn a thick red line approximating the lowest lying and most mesic contour. It's an approximation. Please imagine this low-lying contour where the water runs to if it ever rains enough. The contour is situated roughly centrally to the nests, but you can also see the change in vegetation that sits on these higher quality soils. This vegetation is eucalyptus wandoo woodland, and the same pattern of soils and vegetation and bird nests occurs across Dryandra. Okay, this is a graph explaining the relationship between the low-lying contours and the bird nests. The left side of the graph is the lowest, most mesic area or contour. Then as you move away from the lowest contour to the right along the x-axis, the number of nests decrease exponentially. Take a moment to absorb that. The bird nests are clustered close to the lowest landscape contour. The 2 highlighted points on the graph are 100 meters and 300 meters away from the lowest contour. They emphasize the relationship. At 100 meters, most birds don't nest beyond that point. And at 300 meters, the numbers of nests present is getting close to 0. The graph is the combined result taken from 10 field sites and 413 nests. Now, let me pose some questions that arise from the context that I've described. And if the nests are clumped together, first question, if the nests are clumped together, doesn't this make it easier for a full component of nest predators I mentioned earlier to depredate the nests? Nest predators are drawn to a greater prey density. We know this. But the nest predation rate at Dryandra was only 29%. In comparison, the average nest predation throughout Australia and the world is 72%. Average. So why so much lower if all the nest predators are at Dryandra and the nests are conveniently clumped. This is almost a definition of a convenience store. So now let me draw my long bow and give you some answers. First question, why clumped? The answer, because there was more food in the low-lying areas on the more productive soils. Simple. Let's move on. Why not more nest predation? Answer, the birds group mob predators. I'm not suggesting altruism. It is most likely because they simply nested together, drawn by food, that they are able to mob predators as a group. Noisy miners do something similar, but it's obviously not the same. Why haven't other researchers put this hypothesis forward? Because the threatened assemblage that I work with at Dryandra is largely missing elsewhere. The low-lying and more productive soils were taken first and foremost by farmers. Of course they would. The birds that nested there are gone. And this is our most threatened birds. I needed my context at Dryandra to even begin to see this. But there are also other factors involved, and it's not simply group mobbing, although I think it's important. But I don't have time to explore the other factors today. So my conclusion is my context at Dryandra gives me baseline data on how systems work before they were removed or fragmented. The context of any field site, including mine, holds the factors needed to fully understand what is happening. I do not believe that overarching theories can be applied to any site or habitat without taking the local context into account. An obvious example was the madly overused edge effect theory. Thus, I advocate that to understand any system, you need to understand its context. Thank you for listening.